Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I'm really happy to be able to have the opportunity to speak with you today. I am the DV Consumer Staff Attorney at the Legal Aid Society, and so that means I work with primarily survivors of domestic violence and survivors of gender-based violence, interpersonal violence, and other related traumas in dealing with consumer legal matters. And I will go into a little bit more detail about what that means. Here's kind of an overview of the sorts of things that we're going to be talking about today. If there's something that you want me to cover a bit more that comes up for you, that you have questions about, that comes up for your clients and often, please let me know in the chat so that I can allocate more time to that issue. So in terms of what is consumer debt, what are the sorts of things that I tend to work on? It's things in this left category over here. Credit card debts or debt buyers, companies like Midland or Portfolio Recovery that are debt collectors claiming to collect credit card debts, personal loans, some student loans, auto loans, housing debts where people have left their apartment, and certain types of medical debt. There are other folks at Legal Aid and elsewhere who specialize in other types of debts. And a lot of the rules and rights and options I'm talking about don't necessarily apply in the same way to debts that result from things in this category on the right. Government tickets, fines and fees, taxes, business loans, and child support debt. So the rules of thumb that I'm going to be talking about in this training apply to these things on the left. But if you have questions about things on the right, and I might be able to still point you in the right direction, especially if you visit lawhelpnewyork.org. A lot of times that can help you locate somebody who can assist with some of these other issues. Just so you know the type of work that I tend to do, I tend to support folks who are facing wage garnishments or frozen bank accounts resulting from a consumer debt that is supposedly owed. And there are, in these lawsuits that result in these about consumer debts that result in these wage garnishments and frozen bank accounts, 97% of litigants, give or take, are unrepresented, cannot afford an attorney, and do not have a legal services provider. There's about 100,000 of these cases a year, and unfortunately, I can only represent folks in a small portion of them. So I try to work collaboratively with, explaining to people how they might be able to avoid some of these lawsuits, coordinating with other legal services providers to try to help people kind of take each of these steps with to fight a case with some legal service provider assistance. And so I just wanted to kind of manage expectations about that. I'm not able to accept every referral, but I try to make sure that at least every client, they leave conversation with me better than I found them. At least I've given them some sort of advice or guidance or direction or resources. And, the types of things that I help with is, where creditors or companies that are claiming that they're creditors of a survivor are engaged in something illegal, getting rid of those cases and freeing people from the long-term effects of those cases. Also helping people recover from scams and identity theft. That's another big part of what we do. In terms of domestic violence and consumer issues, part of the reason I'm so glad you're here today is because consumer issues can be such a big barrier to survivors of domestic violence to leaving a relationship. And it's something that, because a lot of the shame and anxiety and confusion around dealing with debt that a lot of us feel on the day-to-day, for survivors of domestic violence who've had a lot of the means for dealing with these issues kind of taken away from them as part of this relationship, it can be something that is a sort of unspoken but very powerful deterrent to leaving an abusive relationship, or it might be a reason to go back into a abusive relationship or enter another one. And so when we help people take some steps to overcome some of these financial concerns, we're helping break cycles of domestic violence. And when I say, economic abuse, domestic violence that's related to consumer debt, we're talking a lot about where an abusive partner, either as part of the abusive relationship, as a way of controlling and deceiving the survivor, or the person that they're, trafficking, controlling access to wages, controlling access to accounts, bank accounts, credit accounts, taking out debt in someone's name, or kind of forcing somebody within the context of that relationship to take out a debt really for the benefit of the abuser. And then, as a result, it comes into these challenges that I'm sure many of you see, folks having trouble getting housing because of debts that, resulted from the abusive relationship. So this is kind of how I contextualize the reason why I do this work and the ways that we see it come up, some of the ways that you might see it come up as well. And kind of the goal of this relationship, sorry, part of the goal of this presentation is just to not to have you memorize how to deal with every single consumer matter, because I know that you already have so much on your plates. The goal here is just to talk about these issues so that, when it comes up that someone, it seems like they're having trouble leaving a relationship or, getting into housing for reasons related to a coerced debt or economic abuse, that at least there is a starting point to try to start to address these issues, to know where to turn, to click on some of the links that are going to be in the slides that are circulated afterwards. Having this as kind of like a handbook or a set of resources that you can use when something rings a bell in the future about the things that we're talking about today related to this kind of list of issues here. So that's my goal, and also to be a resource with some of the trickier issues. As I mentioned, there are so many cases, but I do like to be a resource where I can. So I can kind of help, hopefully this presentation will help you identify whether to refer someone to a financial empowerment center, to send a letter using one of the templates that I've linked to in this set of slides, or when it's really time to get in touch with a consumer law attorney. Just knowing where to turn when these things come up, that's kind of my goal today. And so hopefully this guide is helpful for that reason, and I look forward to your questions along the way. So another kind of background issue that I wanted to flag is debt and relationship type. And I know that a lot of you have received a training on or have come across trainings and issues of like family law, matrimonial law, where the question of who owes what has to do with whether the parties were married. And so this is something where debt and relationship type has to do in the context of a divorce, and sometimes in the context of an order of protection or police report. And in these types of contexts, it has a lot to do with whether or not the parties were married. And this is different. And if the parties were not married, then really the way that it tends to work is that the account holder is the one liable for any debts. In consumer law, it works a little bit differently, and that's something that can surprise folks who are very well versed in how matrimonial and divorce law work. From the perspective of the people who are trying to take your client's money, if someone's an account holder, no matter what anybody else did, unless it's successfully disputed, they're responsible for the debt that's on that account. If someone's an authorized user, from the perspective of the people who are trying to get your client's money, the authorized user is allowed to charge, whatever they like. And so obviously this presents issues for survivors. And that's why I recommend that when someone has debt in their name related to a DV relationship, that they take some of these steps. This is one of those things that, again, I'm not asking you to memorize these things. I just hope that this is helpful when this comes up in your practice. If a survivor brings up that they feel like they are being tracked because their abuser has their credit, here are some steps that I recommend. First, securing an address, because that address, a new address, a safe address, can start popping up if that new address is being used for credit, for new accounts, for debts, things like that. It's possible, if the survivor is worried about this, and it seems like the abuser might be engaged in this kind of behavior, that there could be more stalking. If someone is putting a new address that the abuser doesn't know on things like bills and credit report checks and things like that. So I recommend getting, if stalking is a concern, getting either a PO box or using the New York State Address Confidentiality Program, which is a free New York State program for survivors of domestic violence, where it's pretty simple. They just fill out a form online. There's a link to it in these slides, and they get a PO box that they can use to keep their address private from their abuser going forward. So highly recommend that as a first step if someone's worried about their location being released because of stalking related to credit, debt, and addresses. I also recommend freezes and fraud alerts, checking a credit report, which I'll talk a bit more about how to do that in a few moments. And I have a link here to these tools, which basically kind of lock down someone's credit, so to make sure that other folks are not, such as the abuser, are not going in and using the survivor's credit without authorization. Another thing, if someone's worried about malware that may have been installed on their phone or something like that, techsafety.org, the Cornell Tech Safety Clinic, they're a great resource for folks who are worried about device or tech related stalking or stalking related to accounts. If the concern is less about stalking, or if the concern is either instead or also about debt that the survivor is finding about, they're getting calls about and letters and notices about accounts that they don't recognize. Try getting information, and I'll talk more about later about how to do that, and making an identity theft report at identitytheft.gov. This is just a way to memorialize this, and it can be used as a tool to reduce liability for these debts in the future. Also, if someone comes to you and they know, oh, well, listen, like my abuser, put these debts in my name. I feel, this is a problem for me. I feel like I can't leave. I feel like I can't move forward. Sometimes something as simple as drafting a letter as a DV caseworker, or getting on the phone with the client to call a creditor to separate accounts and close accounts. Sometimes that can be a solution to stop that issue from worsening down the road. There are other resources, including sample letters for some of these things at these links here, lawhelpnewyork.org. And also, if you get stuck with something where it's not quite a lawsuit, but it is something in collections that's a lot of stress for the survivor, New York City has free FECs, financial empowerment centers, where they are free financial counselors to help people through the process of disputing and managing debts. So those are some great free resources for when these issues come up in your practice. In terms of separating accounts from an abuser, something I mentioned in the previous slide, this is something that can be a really helpful first step towards financial extrication. Basically, and it can be a lot of work, it can be a bit stressful, but it's a really important way to kind of get a roadmap about how to protect from, being held back by debts that the survivor could otherwise be held back by. Just sitting down and thinking of a list of every single account they can think of, financial account that they can think of that they can remember. Thinking of, credit card accounts, personal loans, bank accounts, utility accounts, car loans, insurance, just making a long list, changing passwords where possible, calling to cancel them. And again, that's where you as a caseworker can help saying, hey, listen, this is important because this person's a survivor of domestic violence. I would know, I'm an expert in this. That's where you can help an abuser that's where you can help a survivor take first steps to really get themselves out of a situation where they might have to be responsible for something long-term that resulted from the DV relationship. Another really powerful and new law that's, I think, super important is for when a survivor leaves an apartment where they were on the lease, and they are concerned that they are going to be held responsible for the months on the lease after they've left the apartment due to domestic violence, there is a legal protection in New York to manage that issue. And this is something where you can contact me and I can help generate a letter. I have some templates that are kind of easy step-by-step guides to doing this, to terminating a lease, so that the survivor isn't responsible for those months of rent after they left the apartment. So this is something that if someone's fleeing an apartment, they're worried about, they're fleeing an apartment, they're on the lease. It has to be done kind of as soon as possible. Otherwise, they are going to be responsible for the rest of the rent that's on that lease. So if you know that someone left an apartment, they were on the lease, they have some months left on that lease, I highly recommend, asserting these rights, sending a notice to the landlord under this New York Real Property Law 227C. And please feel free to reach out to me for a template so that we can protect survivors from being held responsible for rent after they had to leave an apartment due to DV. Identity theft. So I'm referring to unauthorized use of an account. So charges that were made by someone else without the consent of the person whose account it is, the account holder. And I highly recommend, as soon as the survivor is ready to do this, as soon as it's safe, making an FTC ID theft affidavit at this link, identitytheft.gov. It's not something that's likely to, a lot of survivors are concerned, oh, well, if I make an FTC ID theft affidavit, does that mean there's going to be like a police investigation of the abuser? And the answer is, in my experience, no. Really what it is it's something where you're just kind of putting all this information together on paper so that it can be used to back up a request or a dispute to a creditor to not hold the survivor responsible for these charges that they did not incur. The steps that I recommend taking and that I take with clients where they feel that there may have been identity theft is starting by getting a credit report from annualcreditreport.com. The reason why I recommend this website and not others is because some of the other websites, they will either give you kind of only part of the picture, or they will charge for something that's supposed to be free. But this annualcreditreport.com is a website that's kind of regulated to make sure that people are not being charged, to make sure that people are getting all of the big 3 credit reports. So I recommend going to annualcreditreport.com as opposed to a competitor and downloading all 3 credit reports, and then making a list of things that don't look quite right and putting them into this form, the FTC ID theft affidavit at identitytheft.gov. And that can be a powerful tool with the disputes to the credit reporting agencies and to creditors. And for letters to make these disputes to avoid, liability for these things long term, that's where these 2 websites, Law Help New York and the New Economy Project, they have some templates for that. And if you get stuck, feel free to contact me. One thing about identity theft is that acting quickly gives more protection. There's a whole bunch of different laws, and there's some protections in there for the banks and credit card companies. Unfortunately, the best thing is, even though it's overwhelming, just try to notify the bank in writing as soon as you learn of the identity theft, because sometimes if someone waits too long, they're more likely to be held responsible for that debt, even if it's not a debt they incurred. I'm not saying I'm a fan of this law, I'm just saying it is the law in general. So, even though I understand there's a lot of things going on, it can kind of create these long-term financial consequences if people wait before asserting identity theft. So if it's safe to do so, I highly recommend notifying the bank or credit card company or whomever that something was unauthorized in writing sooner rather than later. And I welcome any questions about this process. A lot of survivors also, I don't know if you come across this, but I come across this, they experience their abuser as having their social security number, and this being a form of control and coercion, that the abuser says, listen, I know folks who are new to the country, an abuser saying, listen, I have your social security number, that means I'm kind of in charge of your finances. Some of the steps that I recommended earlier, making these disputes, checking credit reports, those can be ways to reduce the extent to which this is true. But if there are other things like, listen, this person, I'm really sure that they're using my social security number in so many different ways, I recommend, even though this is not really my area of practice, I just wanted to flag this in case it comes up, I recommend checking I recommend that you have your client check SSA.gov and IRS.gov to see if anything is looking unusual there. and then contacting using lawhelpnewyork.org to contact either a public benefits attorney or a LITC or IRS taxpayer advocate. Low-income taxpayer clinic is what LITC refers to. And yeah, just finding the folks who can help your client sort out those situations. This is just kind of the starting point that I wanted to let you know if someone's really concerned about use of their social security number. So please let me know if you have any questions about that, those general steps that I hope are helpful for you to take with your client. If there aren't any questions at the moment, then I'm going to move on to talking in a little bit more depth about credit reports.
No questions at the moment, but feel free to add anything to the Q&A box, everyone.
Okay, great. And also, if there's anything that, I know that I'm going to be going into depth about these topics that are all next here. I really welcome you letting me know how this is coming up for you, because as an attorney, I know that the way that I see these issues might be a bit different than how they are presenting to you in your practice. So if you say, listen, like nobody's really saying that that someone has their social security number, but people are saying that they're getting collections calls and it's giving them panic attacks. Like if you're hearing certain phrases from survivors that kind of relate to this, but you're not really sure what to do about them, that's the kind of question that I'm really happy to answer and kind of diverge from the more like in-depth set of information that I have here to be more specific and helpful to you and your clients. So with that said, I'll keep an ear out for any questions, in any of those formats. And in the meantime, go in a bit more depth about credit reports. Again, this is just a guide that if someone has, questions about kind of what credit reports are, or how they can be a tool, or why I recommend that people start by looking at their credit reports, this section will hopefully answer those questions. It looks like I have a question in the chat.
Someone asking for your phone number.
Okay. The best way to reach me is by email, but because I usually have a whole bunch of questions. I do that annoying thing that lawyers do where when you ask me a question, my answer is often it depends, and it will depend on things that are in paper. So I tend to be most responsive by email because I tend to need a decent amount of context before I can be truly helpful. But I put my phone number in the chat because I know that, email is not always realistic for everybody. I also asked that because legally there's limits on who I can take as a client, both because of the sheer number of folks that need our assistance and because of like funder requirements and things like that, I ask that if you're going to refer somebody to me, please check in with me first. I might not be the right person to refer someone to because I might not have the like kind of authority to help someone with that issue, or I might just not know the answer about something that's just like purely pre-litigation or non-legal, as well as a financial empowerment center will know the answer to it. Or if I'm conflicted out, like if I'm not legally allowed to take a certain client for some reason, then I'll provide a referral to someone else. But I have like a form to fill out before you refer a client to me. Again, I want to help as many people as I can, but there are limitations. So I just wanted to let you know that, if you reach out to me by phone, WhatsApp, text, voicemail, email, and you want to refer a client, I'm happy to figure out how I can assist, but in order to figure out how much I can assist, I will just need you to fill out a form and answer some questions before and provide some things in writing before I can go forward. So I hope that makes sense and feels fair. Please keep questions coming and comments and observations about what you're seeing in your practice. For now, I'm moving on to credit reports. So the ways that this comes up when I'm speaking with clients is that a lot of survivors feel really, and it can be a barrier to leaving the relationship or to kind of feeling like they can move on from the relationship, is credit scores. Because I know that we have this kind of culture of feeling like a credit score is like a social worthiness score, or like a how good are you at money, or how worthy are you of capitalism score. I know I'm being a little flippant here, but I just wanted to really emphasize that credit scores, for a lot of my clients, it's important to remind them that the credit score is not how much someone is worth. And credit scores and credit reports are known by credit experts to be very, very inaccurate. The reason I say credit scores plural is also because one credit score that someone sees somewhere or hears about from someone is going to be different than a different credit score somewhere else. So there's the big three credit reporting agencies, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. They all have their own credit scoring systems. And then there's also FICO. There's multiple FICO models. And then there's other models as well that different landlords use different ones, different credit card companies use different ones. Certain car lenders will claim that they've checked somebody's credit and that it was bad. But sometimes they will be kind of just using a negotiation tactic, and not actually, kind of speaking to the reality of the situation. So knowing how this system works can be a really good bargaining tool for someone who needs access to credit. Because if someone knows that their credit reports are really strong, the credit report is the kind of list of information that informs the various credit scores. If someone knows that the content of their credit report, is fine, then when they're told, okay, well, you have really bad credit, so we have to charge you really high interest, you can kind of push back on that and get a better deal. And I know people who've succeeded at doing this. So I just wanted to flag that as a tip. Credit scores, don't try to avoid the temptation to rely on them as like a metric of self-esteem, or advise your clients of that. The credit report, like I said, it's the list of information that then goes through like a secret formula that we're not even, most people aren't even allowed to know what's in the secret formula to come up with all these different credit scores. But we are allowed to see our credit reports for free every year on annualcreditreport.com. And there's different kind of folks who are involved with this process. So there's consumers, that's us and our clients. There's users, that's landlords, people checking the credit reports, people checking credit scores. There's furnishers or creditors. These are people who are giving information to the credit reporting agencies. And there's the credit reporting agencies and the folks who generate these scores. Just wanted to give that background, and also that, I'm not a huge fan of the system if it's not completely obvious yet, because it's really broad what is allowed to be on a credit report, and incorrect information is really common, excuse me. So I just really recommend, if this is something that's coming up as a really big source of stress for a client, to just say, listen, I heard from an expert and she said that a ton of people have mistakes in their credit reports, and that there are some legal rights that you have to fix them, and some websites you can use that can help explain how to fix them. So that's just something that hopefully is a message that I can share with you, that you can share with your clients. When you check a credit report, again, incorrect information is really common, and the credit reports also might be different than each other just because that's how they decide to do things. But in general, what we see is a list of information about different debts at different stages. So there's the default, which is the missed payment. That's when something becomes a debt. And then when it's 30 days late, that is when the negative reporting, things that can negatively impact a credit report or credit score, that's when it starts, when something's 30 days late. After something is at least 120 or 180 days late, it's in charge off. And a lot of folks will say, oh, well, I have a bunch of debts, but they're all in charge off, so that's fine. That's actually not fine. That means it's just an accounting term that businesses use to kind of improve their balance sheets a little bit. But it does not mean that someone is not responsible for a debt. So when something's charged off, the person can be held responsible for paying the debt. At any point after the default, debts can go into collections. They can appear several times in the credit report. People can start getting calls either from the company themselves or from a collector outside of the company where the debt originated. And then after that, at some point there may be a lawsuit, and a lawsuit is where you want to get up to the lawsuit. That's where I recommend working with a financial empowerment center. After a lawsuit, that's where I recommend working with a legal services provider, consumer lawyer like me. Another thing is that people often feel like, oh, well, I have all this debt and that's with me forever. Well, the good news is it's not. The deadline to sue someone to force them to be legally responsible for a debt is 3 years after the first missed payment. So that's good news. After those 3 years, they have missed their deadline to sue the client. So that's one protection there. The other one is that after 7 years, negative credit information drops off the credit report, with the exception of bankruptcies, which show up for 10 years, excuse me, and inquiries, which show up for 1 to 2 years. So if someone's worried about their credit being negative forever, that is not necessarily the case. There are steps to rebuild credit, which I will talk about now. Again, using PO boxes and confidential, not sharing confidential addresses. There's steps that people can take. And I tell people, I understand that your credit's really bad, but you take these steps over time and it will start to improve. You'll start to get more opportunities. In the meantime, there are workarounds like working with a CDFI. A CDFI is like certain credit unions or certain banks that are designed to help folks get access to financial services at affordable rates and sometimes have second chances when they've had bad experiences with the financial system. So working with one of those can be helpful. Working with a financial empowerment center, paying things on time, just getting one new card, not asking for a bunch of cards because that can actually be bad for credit. Just asking for one new card, either a store credit card or a secured credit card, or like a personal loan with like a really low interest rate, and just paying it on time, the full monthly amount every month. That's really the way to kind of rebuild. So if someone's really scared about this, all hope is not lost. There is a way to repair it. And then also debt to credit ratio, having high lines of credit, like credit cards with high limits, but only using a tiny amount of that credit card per month. These are all ways that someone can improve their credit. Again, it often takes time, but there are ways. There's also when someone gets their credit report, either because they know that they're going to be applying for housing, because they're worried about identity theft, or if they're worried about being sued. And it looks like there's errors on there. That process that I mentioned before, filling out the identity theft affidavit at the FTC website, identitytheft.gov, and setting up freezes so that someone's credit can't be used without a special PIN that is given to the person who applies for it, so that basically just to secure the credit report. There are other fraud protections that are available for bank accounts and social security numbers. So just wanted to mention that there are, when someone sees things on their credit report they don't recognize and starts to panic, there are protections that are available. It is a bit of legwork, but it is something that can be accessible. One thing that people might get tempted to do is to settle. I will explain this in more detail later, but I just encourage folks to be really careful about that because there are a lot of traps when it comes to trying to settle. When things are not going well, a kind of a rule of thumb for all these processes is sending things in writing by certified mail, keeping copies of things, or even just pictures of documents that were sent, or pictures of envelopes, pictures of like certified mail receipts, to dispute accounts that aren't recognized. So those are some tips on how to handle credit when credit is a concern. I can go into more detail if folks have more questions, but I wanted to check in about questions that folks have so far at this point.
Hi, all right, we have a question in the chat. So what if a client who's living in the shelter found out that their wallet was stolen and someone used their direct deposit card and removed their monthly allowance? They reached out to direct deposit, who told them that the individual, that they lost the case without a trial, and now they're not really sure what they can do to get their money back. Do you have any insight?
Yeah, so that sounds like a benefits issue. And so for public benefits, I recommend calling Legal Aid's A to B hotline, which I am going to put in response to the question. Just a moment.
And we'll
Yeah,
also email out any resources shared in a follow-up email.
And I would just mention I would just mention public benefits issue. And they will try to connect the client to some sort of to a legal service provider who works on public benefits. There's also the FTC identity theft affidavit. I would recommend filling that out. Just explaining the situation.
All right. So this question's by Easy Pass. A client got an Easy Pass under her name and gave it to an ex-partner. However, he did not pay it and is continuing to use the Easy Pass without adding money to it. And now the client has a huge debt. Any advice?
Okay, so that one for Easy Pass. Okay, I have the answer to that written down. I don't typically deal with Easy Pass, but this happens so often that I actually have like a little guide to it. So what I'm going to do is when I follow up by email, I'm going to send the template for, because I see another question about the template of the letter for I believe the template of the letter is, I'm not sure which letter it's referring to, but it might be referring to the lease letter. And so in case it is, I'm going to send lease termination template. Let me know if there's other templates that you guys want. And then the answer to the Easy Pass question. I don't know off the top of my head because there's different answers depending on which it's an agency, it's like a government debt question, which is like technically a little bit outside of what I normally do, but again, it's such a common issue with DV survivors that I have like an explanation, but what should be done in that situation varies slightly by the type of agency to which the debt is owed. So instead of giving you less correct information now, I'm going to give you more correct information later by email. I welcome other questions. In the meantime, I'm going to talk about consumer cases, how to recognize them, what to expect. So part of the reason that I am so busy is that, there's 100,000 of these cases started against low-income New Yorkers every single year. And most of the time, people do not get proper legal notice of the case. And a lot of the time, people don't, the way that they find out about a case, and this might come up in your practice, is someone says, my bank account is frozen. They said there's some kind of debt. A lot of times that's because there was a consumer case and the survivor or whoever was not properly notified of it. And we have found in 2013, they found that there was improper service, so improper notice or no notice at all of the case at 70% of the time. So it's very common that, someone, and a lot of times these lawsuits, they're for debts that people either don't even owe, or they have a defense where they don't have to pay the debt, or there's another legal reason why they actually don't have to pay anything at all. So when someone says, oh, I have a debt, I have a case against me, oh, I got notice from the marshal about a debt, I got notice from the sheriff about a debt. When it's a consumer debt, a lot of times that's when it's really, I got this legal papers, something about a debt, some company, some account. It's really great to contact a consumer lawyer because there are so many different defenses. Here's actually a list of them. Again, not asking you to memorize this, just to make you aware that even if someone's like, no, I'm pretty sure I owe this debt, there might be legal reasons why they don't have to pay that debt, or there might be something kind of tricky that the company did that wasn't really proper. So, and there, even if someone isn't eligible or able to get full representation in the case from an attorney, a lot of times we'll be able to advise of these defenses and explain how to assert them, and people get cases ended against them and get rid of judgments against them, get these bank account freezes and wage garnishments removed all the time by asserting these rights. So I just wanted to kind of give a message of what to do when you hear about these issues. Definitely contact a consumer legal services provider, a consumer law attorney like me, with copies of the court papers, so that we can try to figure out what defenses can be asserted and what can be done, because a lot of the times just starting to pay the debt is actually not the answer at all. So the courts that I work in, I work in, so if you see court papers or a client tells you about something that's in Supreme Court, like New York State Supreme Trial Court, the civil consumer part, like civil court or small claims, that's when you can call me or email me. And a lot of times it's going to be a company that the person doesn't recognize. That's very common. And so that's just kind of what to expect. If someone's freaking out, like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to me? Here's what happens. How it's supposed to happen is it's supposed to start with proper legal notice of a case. Someone gets, notice, someone comes to their door with papers to their address, hands them papers, they get an opportunity to respond to the case, asserting some defenses. And then after, exchanging paperwork between the parties and with the court for a couple months or years, either the case gets discontinued or dismissed. So that means nothing is owed, the case is over, or there's a judgment, and the judgment is what gives a company legal authority to do the bank account freeze or wage garnishment. Let me know if you have any questions about that. One thing to know is that I do tend to, when I get court papers, it does tend to be a time that I recommend acting fast, if at all possible. Or, if someone's worried about a debt, you can tell them, let us know if you get court papers, and, because that's when it's good to contact an attorney, because these judgments, they last for decades, and they can result in someone's wages, someone's property, someone's bank account being taken from them for decades. And the judgment also grows with interest over time. So it can become a really, when I say like long-term consequences or liability, this is what I'm talking about. And so there's a lot of legal protections that can prevent this outcome, but a lot of them, there's deadlines to assert them. And sometimes these legal protections are lost if you just start paying. So this is why I kind of recommend pointing folks in the direction of a consumer law attorney or some of the websites that are linked on the slides here, because, this is what I want to avoid. I want to avoid survivors like having their resources extracted from them when there are legal protections that can be asserted, as long as you respond sooner rather than later, as long as you, put things in writing, as long as you don't make a payment agreement unless you're completely sure that's the right thing to do. So that's just, a big aspect of this. So that's consumer cases. Please let me know if you have any questions about consumer cases, what to expect, if you've heard of them, if you have clients who get notice of them, things like that. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to talking about debt collection, which is something that can happen before and after the consumer case. So when so a lot of times, survivors will find it really triggering to be contacted by a debt collector, because debt collectors can be really notoriously aggressive. And there are, and sometimes also I find that debt collectors kind of leverage the domestic violence when they find out about it, either by threatening to contact the abuser or actually contacting the abuser when they're not allowed to. So this is just some rights that I want you to know about, that actually, if a survivor has the, energy to connect with a lawyer and sue a creditor or a debt collector that's being particularly aggressive, they can actually get money. So a survivor has an opportunity to work with a lawyer to sue a debt collector for money if they violate the FDCPA, if it's a debt collector that doesn't give proper information about the debt, is misleading, is threatening. And there are state laws that do this as well, but they're not as strong. So I just wanted to let you know that, and there's a 1-year deadline to file these cases. But if someone's like really terrified about a debt and the debt collector is acting improperly, I just wanted to let you know that folks have that right. A lot of times though, what I just tell people to do is to use this set of statements. I actually have this like on the wall in my office, because a lot of clients, like, it's, they get really afraid when someone they don't recognize is calling about a debt that has something to do with the domestic violence. So I just recommend they say these 4 things. 1, I dispute this debt, because that triggers some protections under this FDCPA law. 2, do not contact me anymore, because when someone says do not contact me anymore, the debt collector is actually required to honor that. Especially if you give them an alternative, like you can only contact me at, and then you give just one way they can contact, so that if they're about to sue, you can find out. Or you can send a verification letter asking for more information about the debt. Sometimes just asking a verification letter or requiring that the debt collector send verification to a safe address. A lot of times that's enough to get the debt collector to go away. And then making sure not to give any more information or get into extended conversations with the debt collector. That just by saying that's all I have to say, goodbye. So this is the kind of pattern of things that I recommend, that, you know, sometimes I'll practice with clients if they're feeling really panicked. And so I hope that's helpful for you in your practice as well. There are letters that people can send. There are links in the slides about the letters that people can send to basically tell debt collectors, like, you need to really prove that you have a right to contact me about this. Otherwise, you need to, you know, leave me alone about this. That can be a really powerful letter that can provide a lot of relief for people. So I highly recommend providing this link to clients. And if they are concerned about this and it's become, you know, it's connected to the domestic violence, or it's otherwise just causing them a lot of fear and concern. There's something else I wanted to note, and that is that when I mentioned, you know, there's long-term consequences in these cases, but that payment isn't always the answer. Part of the reason for that is because some people are, and a lot of survivors are, legally protected from ever having to pay these debt collectors, even if there is a judgment against them in a case. So so in certain cases, and I'm going to explain what the cases are. In certain cases, when even if a debt collector or a creditor sues someone, wins the case, and then gets a judgment, that legal authority to take from wages or to take from bank accounts, people's survival money is protected under New York state law in these specifically in these consumer credit cases. It's under this law called the EIPA law, and it protects from creditors taking certain amounts of and types of income. So government benefits, pensions, Social Security. Debt collectors and creditors are not allowed to take those from someone's bank account or from someone's public benefits. Bank accounts under $3,000, similarly, those are protected, and wages up to $450 a week. That's after mandatory taxes and deductions. So what this means for you and for your clients is that if someone, especially if someone's like elderly, it's not likely they're going to work again, or if they're on Social Security kind of like long term, or they're like, listen, you know, I don't have time to deal with this case right now. There are certainly, even though judgments last a long time, so if things change in the future, then, you know, this would no longer apply in the future. But if it's kind of a situation where someone's only receiving public benefits long term, and doesn't have any like large assets, property, or large bank accounts, then the kind of that takes away from that kind of like worst case scenario of someone losing their income and losing their public benefits, because these are protected by law. And that's also why, you know, I really recommend people think carefully when they get tempted to just pay these debts, because for a lot of people, it doesn't make sense. Like if they can't be forced to pay the debt and they really need the Social Security, they really need a limited wages for their families to be able to survive, then they should be using these funds on important things like their health care, like their rent, you know, like their food for themselves and their family. You know, prioritize those over consumer debt if someone's judgment proof. I'm not saying don't respond to a case necessarily, but it's just like I recommend that, you know, if someone's like completely, sometimes my clients are completely panicking, like, oh my God, they're gonna take everything I have. And it's like, no, they're not gonna take everything you have. They're not allowed to take wages under $450 a week after taxes and deductions. They're not allowed to take bank accounts under $3,000. They're not allowed to take away government benefits. They could take away things other than that, and that's why you want to contact a consumer law attorney for help. But this is just information about those protections that are in place when somebody's in that worst case scenario. I welcome any questions about that. I know it's a little complicated, a little technical. I'm happy to discuss it more.
Okay, a couple questions.
Mhm.
So does this apply to IRS garnishments due to old joint filings? And bank?
No, it does not. I'm really, really glad you asked. Yeah, so for that, I recommend contacting a low-income taxpayer clinic. Yeah, if you go to that newyorklawhelp.org and indicate that it's a problem relating to taxes, finding a provider who can help fill out the forms for to get relief related to IRS debts. Because yeah, these protections do not apply, but there are other ways to address that issue, so that's why I recommend contacting a tax lawyer.
Great. So this is in regard to hospital bills. Seniors are usually very scared after receiving large hospital bills, which are not covered by their insurance. What would be done in this situation?
Yeah, so I recommend contacting a financial, and so that I have a link earlier to, actually I have a link later also, to financial empowerment centers. Let me find, oop. No, it's not there. I'm gonna find it. There is a link. Okay, I mentioned them there. Financial empowerment centers, FECs. The other way to contact, yeah, the link here, financial empowerment centers, they can help with, they're free financial counselors that help with from the city that help with managing debts. We also have some health law lawyers at Legal Aid who help with these as well. So you can contact us if there's like a legal issue or issue with the medical debt. But I recommend working with at that stage where they're just like first finding out about the debt. I recommend contacting the financial empowerment centers using that link, or by calling 311 and specifically asking for a financial counselor to set up an appointment to figure out kind of how to manage that. Because a lot of times people get kind of tempted to, when they see that there's a debt, they get tempted to try to settle it, or by working with a for-profit group. And these for-profit groups, a lot of times people kind of pour thousands of dollars in that they might have not had to pay, or they just pay like hundreds of dollars in fees for a service that's available for free, that is not better than the services somebody would be getting for free. So I recommend like reaching out, and just getting some more advice on how to deal with that. I'm not able to answer more specifically because it depends on like, how the billing was done, things like that. But those are the reasons, that's the direction I recommend pointing someone when they're concerned about that. And also reminding them that their Social Security and money from pensions cannot be taken by a debt collector unless they agree to give it to them. So it might not make sense to agree to give it to them.
Great, thank you. That's all we have right now.
Okay. So some general tips when people are finding out about debt collection, in addition to what I mentioned, if it seems like there's a lawsuit, connect to the consumer law attorney. There's a website. If you're curious to see whether there's a lawsuit against somebody, there's a website called eCourts, or you can search by name to see if there's a lawsuit. For letters to dispute debts, there's this website, Law Help New York, that I've been mentioning, that has some templates. Checking to get a bigger picture of what's going on, checking credit reports at annualcreditreport.com, avoiding scams and settlement traps that may not make sense in your client situation. Also, if the question is specifically student loans, there's EdCap, which I linked to here, and they are the student loan experts. So just a bit more of a settlement. There are some kind of like magic words. So sometimes with settlement, what happens is people start paying, they lose their defenses, and then the money kind of just vanishes and the debt grows, even though they're already paying. And I hate it when this happens because it's really, really hard to advocate for somebody when there's a settlement. They're like, it's just really hard to get someone out of having to keep paying at that when they might have otherwise not had to pay. So and it's like almost impossible. It's like almost impossible to get the money back ever. If it's just a really tough situation. But if someone really, really wants to settle a debt and they really don't want to contact anyone for help, just making sure they get these terms in full satisfaction, and that the debt is disputed. But feel free to contact a consumer law attorney or financial empowerment center for assistance. There's also bankruptcy, which gets a bad name, but for some people, it is an option and it falls off a credit report after 10 years. People who go through bankruptcy tend to find that it's a huge relief, and that, you know, for the types of debt that can be discharged in bankruptcy, you know, it just ends the life of those debts. And so, you know, again, it gets a bad name, but it really is a fresh start that just reflects when somebody's been going through something challenging. And depending on the type of debt that someone has, and depending on the type of paperwork that they can get, and safety concerns about whether the abuser would get notified, this might be something to consider, just as an option. And then it's just a way to get a clean slate, you know, a negative mark on credit, but then you get to start rebuilding credit right away. And it can take a lot shorter of a time than defending consumer credit cases. So just wanted to put that on people's radar, that bankruptcy gets a bad name, but it's also an option for people who've dealt with some really bad stuff. So that's my position on that. And next, scam spotting. I find that a lot of clients, a lot of my clients in the Bronx, especially a lot of seniors, a lot of folks who are new to this country, get targeted by scammers. And so I have some rules of thumb, especially for folks who are new to the financial system, either because they are survivors of domestic violence, so they're susceptible to scams because they're used to basically being scammed by their abuser, so they're not able to, you know, recognize these kind of red flags. Here are some guides that people can have. So this is something that I repeat to people all the time, about what scammers do. So how to tell something's a scam versus whether it's legitimate. They pretend to be from an important organization. They claim that there's a problem or a prize, and they add pressure to act quickly. And what I tell people is, you know, that pressure to act quickly, it's a form of psychological manipulation. You know, don't be ashamed. These people are professionals. But they use that pressure to kind of suspend people's critical thinking. You know, that's kind of the way I explain it to people. And as healthcare providers, I'm sure you could explain it even better than I can, exactly how, you know, the sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system play into that, especially for folks with PTSD, where, you know, those systems are already, you know, facing a lot of challenges. But just, you know, oh, is someone calling you and adding a lot of pressure to give information or give money right away? Okay, like that's a red flag. You should, you know, and they're demanding payment in a specific way. Okay, that's, you know, that's red flags. That's something where it makes sense to say, send me a letter. It makes sense to say you might call back, and, you know, and then instead of calling back the number that the scammer called from, or whoever called from, call back the actual number of the place by finding it on an insurance card, or finding it on a letter from the government agency, or finding it on the official government agency website, or finding it on the back of a credit or debit card. That's, you know, something that's kind of the way that I frame it. Is this someone's calling, they're demanding information right away, there's claiming there's some sort of problem, and you're just, to be completely sure, just put a pause in the conversation, check against papers, ask them to send paperwork, don't give them other information. I hope that's a helpful guide just for folks, also because sometimes if they've been scammed once, the international network of scammers will kind of exchange someone's information, and then they get targeted by more scammers. So just, you know, when this comes up, when someone seems vulnerable to scams, you know, just flagging, these are the ways to recognize it. And what you can do is just ask for more time, ask for more information, not give them more information, not give them more time. The FTC, again, I'm not claiming that government is perfect. What I am saying is that the FTC in particular does have some helpful resources on figuring out whether something is a scam. So sometimes, especially with romance scams, people will be like really excited that someone's showing them love and affection online. But sometimes showing someone, okay, like, does this person meet all these criteria that the FTC lists from investigating scammers? Okay, maybe that's something to consider. So I just wanted to flag that as a resource for kind of having these conversations with people. And yeah, I encourage people to do their research. Like, I sometimes send these guides to clients if they're like, well, I want to find I want to buy a car, but I'm, worried I'm going to get a bad deal. Sometimes I'll send them these links about like, here's how to sort out whether something's a good deal or too good to be true. So just in summary, some of the steps that you can take, and some more resources if you're interested. And if you and links to those, and if you get stuck, refer to me and I can either point you in the right direction, provide the relevant resources, or, assist with the whole case. So I wanted to turn now to Q&A. I know I moved through things really quickly, but I want to take some more time to discuss whatever issues you're seeing, and have questions about.
All right. We don't have any questions right now, but
Who's raising their hand? Michael?
oh great. Here, Michael, I'll make it so you can speak. Hi, Michael. Did you want to talk? I think you need to unmute yourself. Oh, okay. Accidental.
Okay.
While we wait, I am just going to launch a quick poll that would be great for you all to fill out. And separately, I'm sharing a short survey. If you can fill it out. This is how we learn about other trainings that would be useful for you all. So let me know. And then again, definitely feel free to add things in the Q&A. I'm just doing some of my sort of housekeeping stuff while we wait. I'm going to let you all know about a couple upcoming consortium events. On tomorrow, we have an interagency case conference. If you haven't attended one of those, it is basically an opportunity to share a challenging case or a client or like system that you're navigating, and get feedback and sort of crowdsource resources and information from other participants. And we have a few experts on the line as well. Really anything related to like the housing sector, maybe benefits or in like health things. And so it's a really cool way to get feedback, or if you don't want to present a case, you can just attend and help out, but that's tomorrow. And then sorry, that's the wrong date. It's 10/5, not 8/5. We have a housing marketplace for veterans. And housing marketplaces are an event the consortium was doing a while, or many of like a couple years ago. And then we kind of tapered off with CAPS, but we realized that there are a lot of gaps in referrals. So we're starting it up again. And basically you're going to hear from 3 housing providers who have vacancies for veterans. And they're going to let you know about eligibility, the application process, and you're going to get a bunch of information about how you can help your veteran clients apply for those housing opportunities. And so that is on October 5th, not August 5th. Let's see. Okay, question. In regards to breaking a lease, how will they ask for proof of domestic violence?
Great question. So the way that, just going back to the slide to have that visual aid there as well. So the letter that you provide as a service provider that says, I work in this field and I can tell you this person is a survivor of domestic violence, that is the proof. So it just has to be a notarized letter. And again, I'll send the templates for that after the presentation, but case handler or advocate documentation is sufficient proof in that situation. The key with this letter is just to send it sooner rather than later and to follow the template from the Real Property Law 227C. Which if you, again, like if you look it up online, it comes up, but also I'll send you the template so that you have it. So you fill it out, and then you fill out the letter, the client fills out the letter, both of them are notarized, they're sent to the landlord, and that is how that works.
Great, thank you.
That's different than the disputes. So the disputes for debts that, you know, you want to come off of a credit report, that the proof that I recommend getting is the FTC identity theft affidavit. One thing with the ID theft affidavit that I just wanted to flag is that sometimes creditors will claim that they need a police report. And starting in December, there's a law that basically says, no, you don't. I also recognize that for a lot of clients, there's a lot of different very valid reasons why they don't necessarily want to go to the police, or they can't, or, you know, it's not safe. So feel free to reach out to me for more advocacy and assistance if that happens, or if someone does want a police report, they feel comfortable going to the police to request one, but then the police are denying it. Feel free to reach out to me in that situation. I can't guarantee that I'm going to solve the problem necessarily, but I can guarantee that I will advocate, and I have had success with overcoming these issues before. And I can kind of walk you and your client through the next, sometimes very challenging steps to overcoming that. But yeah, so with leases, a case handler letter in the right format as required from the Real Property Law 227C is enough proof. For other types of disputes, having that letter can be really helpful, but I also recommend getting an FTC ID theft affidavit to hopefully avoid being asked for a police report. If you are asked for a police report, or if you get stuck with the dispute process, you can definitely reach out for, at the very least, a consultation or some technical assistance on that.
Great, thank you for that. Any other questions? I'm gonna give it one more minute in case things come up, since we have a little time. We don't want to cut anyone off.
I'm
So
shocked that I was so clear. Usually attorneys are, I'm surprised that, like, if I use any jargon, I really want to know. I'm shocked that I'm hopeful that the reason why there's no questions is because I was very clear, but I always strive to make this clearer and more helpful. So I really welcome any feedback on how I can do that.
I think it was very clear. I think that's probably why there aren't too many questions, which is awesome. So,
well, I am grateful for that, and I'm grateful for all of you giving your time and attention. I know there's already so much on your plates. Hopefully these resources save you time and save some searching about what to do in these situations. You know, hopefully this is helpful to point you in the right direction when these issues come up, which, you know, as we know statistically, is almost all of the time. So
yeah, absolutely. We really appreciate it. I'll follow up with the training recording and the slides. If anyone who attended this meeting has any additional questions, feel free to send me an email, and I'll see if I can get in touch with Claire about it. And thank you so much, Claire. This was really important, and we really appreciate it.
I really appreciate everyone's kind words. You know, not too many people are fans of attorneys, so you guys are really, you folks are really energizing me right now. So I really, really appreciate it. And thank you so much for giving your time and energy and continuing to fight the good fight.
Yeah, same to you. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.